Morning everybody. As Milo said, my name is Tom van Vuren, or to my Dutch friends in the audience, goedemorgen. Ik ben Tom van Vuren. It has never been a better time to be a Dutchman in England as now. Mini Holland's being introduced in London, I read. I wonder if that will include coffee shops. Dutch style roundabouts. I've tried them. I can tell you, they're not as easy as they look. And a push for cycling that needs to achieve levels similar to what we enjoy in the Netherlands. I love modelling, so bear with me when I get sometimes a little bit evangelical about the subject. Peter asked me to do today's opening speech on the subject of addressing transport transformation through modelling. What I've done is changed it slightly to suit my interest and talking about transforming modelling to address transport transformation. Oops, that's a competitor slide there. You may think otherwise, but actually models don't solve problems. I really cannot see how we can meet air quality standards with microsimulation. And I think that is a message that we all need to recognize. Our models don't solve problems. We need to use our models to help others solve problems. And read that quote there by a guy called Steve Atkins, one of the more skeptics, as you can see, about modelling. And although he's nearly retired, I think his views are still shared by many people for whom we ultimately deliver our work. Let's be honest, most of our practitioner colleagues see us as a bunch of nerds. A necessary evil. Expensive, opaque, generally late in delivery, sometimes too late to actually make any difference. And just read this quote again of David Hartgen, a professor in the States, who actually is a modeler himself. Doesn't make you feel that good, does it? So, if we as transport modelers want to contribute to transport transformation, our image, our toolkit, our role in decision support needs to change. In very simple terms, we need to move away from the idea that models will solve problems, that models can give the right answers. And a quote that I like to use is that models should not be used to provide the answers, but that models should be used to sharpen the questions. Think about that. Models being used to sharpen the questions that our practical colleagues need to ask and need to solve. Wouldn't that be exciting? Wouldn't that make our role a lot more relevant? It allow us to test different assumptions, different model forms, new model forms, simpler models, more complex models. And it would also allow us to admit that sometimes we actually don't know the answers, or that the answers that we give have got a wide range of uncertainty attached to them. And going back to what I said earlier, our models don't give the answers, and at the moment I don't think they help sharpen the questions either. So this is my theme throughout the presentation. We need a different approach to modelling to address and support transformation. And I'll try and discuss that through a number of points, issues, examples in the next few slides. Hang on, what have I done now? My transport modelling pedigree is equilibrium modelling. I can bore for Britain about equilibrium modelling. Convergence, existence of solutions, Frank Wolf, Kuhn Tucker, etc., etc. And it is a very solid basis for much of the modelling that we do. But as I hope to point out, it is too restrictive a framework if we want modelling to support transformation. Equilibrium and transformation, they don't really sit well together. We must be willing to think outside that comfortable equilibrium modelling box. We need to move away from single point forecasts. So for that reason alone, I suggest two alternatives that we need to consider. One is scenario modelling, explicitly seeking different results from different assumptions from different model types. Recognizing that our knowledge is incomplete and the future that we put into our models is very uncertain. Testing the resilience of decisions that need to be made and again help sharpen the questions. The other thing is that we need to start thinking more and using more and building more behavioral-based models. Hello, you say, all our models surely are behavior-based. To which I say, are they really? Do you explicitly and consciously decide to make a trip, then to decide where you go, then decide which mode to take, and then decide which route to take? Of course not. It is a convenient simplification that was designed in the 1960s, which made the computation easy, and which is actually relatively easy to explain to an outside audience. But the reality, as we all know, is much more complex. One of the greatest challenges we face, I think, in our models is reflecting the incredible increase and the incredible importance of information available before, during, and even instead of traveling. The equilibrium framework that we use is based on the informed traveler and who makes rational decisions, and it just doesn't do justice to the complexities, as we all see, of the information that's now available to us and the way in which that is being used and the way in which that will change our behavior in the future. So, what I'm arguing for is that modelers need to go back to being modelers. Actual modeling rather than being software users. Take responsibility for understanding the true requirements of the problem that you're trying to model, the policy, the question that's being asked, the issue that the decision maker is facing. Develop a suitable model approach, which will be as simple or as complex as necessary. Reflecting things such as data availability, time and money, budget, and so on and so forth, but not just fall back on the software that you feel comfortable using and that you've been using for the past few years. The other thing that's quite interesting then is I think that we can start using models not to forecast what the future might be, but actually start looking at what we would like the future to be and start using the models to backcast and seeing what the route might be that we need to take, that we can take to get there. So rather than letting the model tell us what the future is, actually letting the model help us identify how we would get there. What is so wrong with equilibrium modeling? Let's take the third point. I think equilibrium modeling is biased towards maintaining the status quo. Some might say it's biased not just towards maintaining the status quo, but also towards the current mode split and the prevalence and the dominance of the car that we see in most of the work that we do. And that's not going to help us to get to a transformed society, to a transformed transport system. The other point is that there are enormous vested interests in equilibrium modeling. And that's not just to do with software, but also to do with the skills that we all have and the reputations that at the moment determine our field. I'll give you an example of where I think equilibrium modeling has been abused in the past. And the interesting thing is that later on Lorenzo will talk about optima and tell us that perhaps my concerns are no longer true. As long as I've worked in transport modeling, people have used equilibrium models to do short-term predictions. And what's the whole point about short-term predictions? It is predicting traffic flows, traffic conditions, when something unexpected happens. Incidents, roadworks, etc. That inevitably leads to travellers not having complete information, not knowing what all the alternatives are. And it also inevitably leads to a dynamic response by those travellers. That is the last situation ever that you would want to use equilibrium modelling for. So let's see what Optima can do for us to do that better. Can we all go home then? Of Of course not. There is still hope for us. And that goes back to the one point where I truly believe that equilibrium model will continue to be important to us. And that is in that single point forecasting to support funding decisions, to compare alternatives, and to feed economic and financial cost-benefit analysis. But let's admit that our equilibrium models will always be wrong. And someone once said, and even if the outcomes were right, it wasn't because your model was right, but because you were lucky. And hang on, where am I? Yes, it's not just our models that are imperfect, it is mainly our ability to predict the future inputs that feed our models that are imperfect, particularly things like population and economic changes. And modelling different futures will de-risk the decision-making process. We don't actually know, but we can use the models to explore what might happen given different assumptions about what that future might be. And we can all relate to that, having produced forecasts in, let's say, 2007 and 2008, and finding ourselves in 2013 quite far removed from whatever we thought that future might be. Use the model to sharpen the questions. Test alternative economic growth and see if the decisions that your end users need to make will still be the right ones and will stand up. Surely all our models are behavior-based. As I said earlier, is our standard choice modelling framework really behaviourally based, or is it just a convenient economic simplification of reality? People are a lot more complex than Homo economicus, and even Daniel McFadden, who is considered the godfather of discrete choice modelling and utility maximisation modelling, is starting to question whether this is really the right way in which to model transport, and going back to the theme, to model transformation in transport that we are all seeking. A few ideas of what perhaps we could do about that. Let's make some simpler models that we can actually understand. Transparency in our models, where we can really look through and get a feel for the impacts of certain assumptions that we make on the outcomes. Let's be brave and test some different paradigms than the economic utility maximization paradigms that most of our models are based upon. Let's just listen to those modeling skeptics that you saw in my earlier slides and see if we can learn something from them, because they clearly don't see that we are supplying them with the kind of services that they require. Challenge ourselves. I think we are better than just robots applying software. Yesterday, Mary Krass already referred to the need of considering an aging population in policy making. We also need to consider an aging population in our models. And I think the demographic changes are probably the greatest challenge that we face in our field. And I question what the value is of observing and modelling the current population if we can actually understand, and we need to admit, that the future population will be very different from today's. Many models, and particularly the four-stage models that I referred to earlier, are based around family structures, nuclear family structures, that no longer are the norm. I believe that less than half the children these days live in a nuclear family. Working practices have changed to such an extent that our focus on the morning commute when we start building models is probably no longer the right way of doing that. Not only will we have a much older population in the future, Mary already referred to that, but those people will be quite different from today's old person. Their health, their social status, their available income will be quite different from what retired people have got today. And therefore their behaviour, their transport behaviour, will be quite different. Immigrants. We all know, I hope we all should know, that immigrants have got quite a different behaviour than the current local population. Fascinating when you're trying to build a model for Dubai, let's say, where the majority of the population in a few years' time actually is not even living there now. Not only is their behaviour quite different from the current population that you might be interviewing and observing and building your models on, but it's also so incredibly difficult to forecast what their numbers are, driven by global economic changes. And finally, other changes, structural changes that are occurring in our society, such as employment status of young people and the way in which the labour market will have to change to accommodate both people early on in their career, not finding the kind of 9-to-5 job that perhaps we all rolled into when we started, but also people working later and fighting for jobs that will have to lead to some kind of different approach to work, part-time work, perhaps job sharing and so on and so forth. I don't know what that future is going to be like, but I do know it's going to be different from what we've got today, and therefore our models need to be different from what we've got today. I mentioned Homo economicus. Hang on, where have I gone? Sorry, guys. Yes, I mentioned Homo economicus before. Perfectly informed, makes rational decisions, and any misinformation that this person has got is reflected in an error term. Be it an error term in a logic choice model, or be it an error term in our stochastic assignment. More information, smaller error term. Hey, we can model that, but it really is not as simple as that. This flowchart here tries to reflect, and I borrowed that, as you can see, from John Pollack from Imperial College, tries to reflect in a choice model the travel decision that people might make in a virtual world. And indeed, it looks like we can explain those kind of decisions in our current utility maximizing framework. But he also made another point which I want to reflect here, that in a new information society, models that are based on trip generation, distribution, mode choice and assignment are just not going to hack it. We will have to start looking for different ways in which to reflect information and the huge increase in information in our models. Isn't that scary? I would say, isn't that exciting? This is something really new that we can start dealing with, and something new and challenging, and hopefully something where we can make a difference. For those of you that are interested, that is the utility maximizing formulation with which we can solve it. But I don't think that's the right way forward. So returning to the title of my presentation. If we are serious about playing a role in transforming transportation, we need to recognize that there's a limit to what our off-the-shelf packages can do. Sorry, PTV, but that's the way it is, and I hope that you're going to be part of this transformation as well. The main reason is that if we expect or if we want the future to be different for today, that models that are based on today's behavior are just not good enough. We also need to recognize, as I said, that if we want our forecasts to be better, that it's not necessarily our models that are the problem, but our ability to forecast the inputs and the very uncertain inputs in terms of demography and economy. And therefore, let's model scenarios. Let's not rely anymore on single point forecasts. Let's explore what the alternatives in the future could be, and therefore whether the decisions that are being made on transport investment and transport policy over a long term are resilient to those changes. And that means that we need to embrace that different models will give different answers, and that is not a problem. It actually adds information, it helps us sharpen the question. My final slide, and my final thoughts, you'll be pleased to hear. If we're interested in transport transformation, it is not just the destination that's counting, it's also the journey to get there. And there are two reasons for that. The first one is that we may never get there. So understanding the route from where we are now to a transformed transport system and a transformed role of transport in the transport system. The route is important because we need to identify at what points there are key decisions to be made where we can adjust that route towards a transformed transport system. And the second point is that there are many people out there, including probably ourselves, who will live their whole lives through this period of transformation. And therefore, we must ensure that they are served as well by our transport systems and our transforming transport systems, as well as the beneficiaries of whatever change we will be able to achieve through a new look at the needs of society in terms of transport and how we supply that. Welcome to London, welcome to the PTV user group meeting. I would say let's make this more than just a meeting about software. Thank you.